One. And we're just going to go ahead and give a few moments for folks to go ahead and filter into the chat. Or sorry, you filter into the chat now. Please feel free to enjoy this starting slide. And we'll get going in just a moment. Okay. All right. So thanks everyone for joining in. My name is Jenna Quinn, and it's my pleasure as the Assistant Director of Alumni Engagement to welcome you all to this edition of the 49er Industry Chat. Before we start, I just have a couple of housekeeping items. We will be, I just need to inform everybody that we will be recording the chat. So what this means for you is that this will be available for you to view again on our website at www.csulb.edu/alumni. Feel free to view it again, share it with a friend, share it with a colleague, anyone you might think would get something good out of this, please do share. Since this is a webinar format, for those of you who are joining us today live, we encourage you to submit any of your questions into that Q&A box, and we'll be making sure that gets on over to our moderator and our chat host today. And so with that, I'm happy to introduce our moderator today, Alice LaViolette. Alice earned her bachelor's degree in 1969 and her master's degree in 1980 in psychology, and is a nationally recognized expert in the area of domestic violence. She has appeared on national and local media, educating the public on domestic violence, the plight of battered women and children, and helping perpetrators change their beliefs. Thank you so much for joining us today, Alice, and hey, take it away.
Okay, thanks, Jenna. Well, I'm really excited to introduce Shauna. Shauna Gates has been in law enforcement for over 28 years, beginning with the Pomona Police Department in 1993. Then most of her career with the San Bernardino Police Department, and retired as the chief of police for the Community College District in 2021. She works part-time now as an instructor with Cal State Long Beach for the Center for Criminal Justice. She teaches law enforcement professionals throughout the state. And she graduated from CSULB with a master's in emergency management. Her other interests, maybe you can tell by her background, her other interests include traveling here and abroad, camping and hiking. She's now in the Narrows of Zion National Park. And we're so happy to have you, Shauna. I have a question. I wanted to ask you, during your time at Cal State Long Beach, first of all, what led you to go to Cal State Long Beach, and were you involved in activities while you were there?
Yeah, so I had a friend at work in the city of San Bernardino, a fellow officer, and we would regularly have conversations about wanting to further our education. We had already had our bachelor's degrees, and so in our conversation, I would tell him, you know, I don't want to go into a master's program that is specifically related to law enforcement, in such as criminal justice or leadership. I wanted something different that was going to still help me in my career, but also allow me to potentially do another career. And he had done some research on emergency services management master's program. And with that information, I did my research and I went to him, I said, that is exactly what I'm looking for. When you're a full-time professional in any profession, it is very difficult to go back to school, as we say, and further your education. So for me, the fact that the program was an online program and that the professors were readily available to assist you at any time, that really called out to me, other than the topic itself, knowing that I could actually use that in my current profession. And potentially in the future, my thought was, oh, maybe I'll use this and go be an emergency manager for a city or a college or university after I retire from the law enforcement profession. So a lot of my time was not spent on campus. It was spent online, but I will say the relationships that you build going from class to class, even online at the time, was still very beneficial for me personally.
Thanks. Well, let me ask you, what made you go into law enforcement, and was it something that you had always kind of wanted to do, or did you sort of land there by accident?
Well, it started off with an accident at the age of 14, 15 years old in high school, and then became something that I was completely passionate about at that point. So I knew that I wanted to be a police officer at the age of 14, 15 years old. And the way that happened was I was talking to a counselor, school counselor, and because I was ahead in my classes and I had to do an elective course is what they call, I don't even know if that's what they call it still, but I had to do an elective course, and the counselor was like, oh, there's this law enforcement class that fits into your schedule. And I said, okay, well, it doesn't matter. I just need to get the credit. And the class was actually being taught by a deputy from LA County Sheriff's Department. So he was coming in and teaching high school kids about law enforcement and what the profession is and what you can do and what it all entails. And I literally, from the point he would take us on different field trips and explain to us, have different people come in and speak to us. And at that point, I was probably maybe a couple of weeks in and I was hooked. I knew then that I wanted to be a law enforcement officer, mainly from talking with him and what he expressed to us, which was being able to serve the community. There's a lot about community service and getting out in the community and helping those people who are falling as victims to certain types of crime. So that's where it all started. And the hurdle for me was my parents not wanting me to be a police officer, not because of the profession itself or any negativity towards the profession, but the safety aspect and being their baby, their only daughter, the youngest child. There were no other officers in my family. So I was the first. So by the time I actually told them, I was ending my second semester at university after I had graduated high school. So I had to, get up the nerve to actually tell them what I really wanted to do for a living. But it did start by accident. So that's how I ended up in a great 28-year career.
That's terrific. That's terrific. What were some of your, as you moved up through the ranks, because obviously you became a chief, but were you a street officer for a period of time?
Yes. So with the city of Pomona, you obviously start off in patrol. So I started there in 1993, went through the academy, went through the field training officer program after the academy. And I was a patrol officer for my time there from 1994 to 1996 when I finally finished the academy, minus the 2 years I spent in the helicopter, which they still consider patrol because we were working patrol just in a helicopter, not a vehicle. And I know we talked about that offline, but I got to fly in a helicopter for 2 years as a young officer, which was great. Nobody else wanted the job, which is how I got it. Another accident, but ended up being a great learning experience for me. When I transitioned to the city of San Bernardino, again, I spent the majority of my time there, also at patrol at the beginning. So a lot of patrol time, even when you promote to a sergeant, which I did at the city of San Bernardino, again, a lot of patrol time. I loved patrol. I almost, sometimes you get into a portion of your job that you really love and you don't recognize that you also need to move on and learn different things. I was very comfortable working patrol. We were busy. Unfortunately, I worked in a violent city. So there was a lot of stress levels that would go up and down throughout your shift, but it was what I loved. So yes, definitely worked patrol.
When you were a sergeant, did you, was more of that administrative, or was that also patrol work and other kinds of work?
Yeah, mostly patrol. Again, I was in my zone of work patrol, so I was a sergeant at the city of San Bernardino for 10 years. For 8 of that was strictly working patrol, different shifts. 2 of those years, I was assigned to the community policing team, which was also working patrol, but also working community engagement. It goes hand in hand. You're still wearing your uniform and making contact, but it was more of a focus on 2 things. One, engaging with the community and building that trust. And on the other side, when an incident would occur, there was a particular problem plaguing a particular area, and we would get complaints. Myself and my team were responsible for going and resolving those issues.
So after did you remain a sergeant until you became a police chief, or did you move into other areas like detective or something like that?
So even and we'll kind of have to back up, as after patrol officer, I eventually, as a patrol officer, went to the vice and narcotics unit. So that was like a couple of years of a detail. And I was supposed to be there for 4 years and ended up promoting out of that unit and going into the detective bureau. For us, our city was broken up into different districts. So I was a detective assigned to the west side of San Bernardino. I was very familiar with the west side. I was very familiar with the community on the west side. So I became essentially their detective. And I would handle specific cases, gang-related cases, anything that popped out that might have needed some more individual attention. And eventually I could work any type of case. Did that for about a year, and they put me into the detective bureau. And I started off with crimes against children, domestic violence, those types of cases, and then moved around within the detective bureau, because that's just the way that things work in law enforcement. Sometimes you gain all this experience and then they move you to another bay. So I had an opportunity to work almost every area in the detective bureau, except burglary. And my last 30 days in the detective bureau, I was assigned to the homicide unit because I was getting promoted to sergeant, and they wanted to put me in there to get even more experience before I became a sergeant. So that's kind of where the detective side came in. And then the sergeant world came in. And as a sergeant, I chose to take the examination for the lieutenant's promotional exam, and took that exam. And it's a process, just like every other process. There's an interview, there's a written examination, and so on. And I promoted off of that list my very first time taking the exam, and promoted off that list, and was promoted to lieutenant in 2017. I'm trying to remember, 2018, probably 2018. And that is when I got away from patrol, and not by my own decision. The chief decides who goes where. At the time, the chief had assigned me to actually the civilian side, which was being the manager of our records bureau and our dispatch unit. So taking somebody like me, and this is part of, the profession, again, people get stuck in what they do every day, and you get used to it, and you're really good at it. And then you get put into something that you know nothing about, and you get that little fear sets in. And then you start to, for me personally, I saw it as a challenge to learn something different that I had never known about our profession, which was the civilian staff.
Well, that's really interesting. And let me ask you, when you were working, because it sounds like you worked in everything, as you said, except burglary. So were there favorite things that you did, or cases that stand out? Because I know people probably would like to hear a story that stood out to you.
Yeah, for me, working a homicide was, for me, more challenging. And in the sense that most officers, when you first become an officer, what you're looking for is that excitement. You're getting in a vehicle pursuit, or a foot pursuit, and there's all this action going on, the kind of stuff you see on television. But for me, working a homicide, even at the patrol level, from start to finish and solving that, or helping be part of solving that with your fellow detectives and officers for the families of those victims or for the victims themselves, that was always for me a good side of working something that's such a terrible situation for everyone involved. So not really exciting. I mean, I could talk about all the foot pursuits and the car chases I've been in, and, you know, running into places where people are shooting off guns, but there's another side to the profession. So those were, and I learned a lot more from an investigative side. I learned a lot more about how to communicate with people from different areas, from different backgrounds, and learning how to develop that communication style myself helped me further in my career.
Oh, I bet, because you'd have to interview a lot of people in a homicide case and probably interview a real diverse group of people.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
you're interviewing people who have just potentially experienced one of the most devastating things in their lives. I will tell people there's nothing like, you know, responding to a homicide and a mother is there holding her child, whether he is a gang member or not, and that's why he got shot and killed. That's still his mother. And you still have to figure out how to, if you can at all, which you can't, comfort those family members and those friends that are dealing with this situation. So there's a lot involved, not just the investigative side, but from a mental health standpoint for officers in general. All these things come into play.
Yeah, I was looking at, you know, your interests and everything, and I was thinking, did you have a pretty good way of taking care of yourself? Because those are intense situations.
Yeah, you know, not initially. I will say that, you know, as a young officer, it's just about the job and doing the work and making yourself proactive out in the streets and getting things done. And I will say early on, 2 years into my career, I lost my first partner and friend, and he was killed in the line of duty in the city of Pomona.
Wow.
So, and I was one of the first officers on the scene after it occurred. So luckily we had a sergeant who was a mentor to most of us, and he was just starting a peer support program. And back then in the early 90s, it was a lot of, oh, do we really need this? And I will say that man, I'll speak for myself, but I will say that sergeant saved my career. 2 years or a few years into my career, he saved my career by recognizing the trauma that we had all just experienced and getting us the help that we needed at the time. And then being able to use that throughout our career and pass it on to other officers.
That's great, because I know that it's been you know, with the military and with the police department, sometimes asking for help is a difficult thing.
Yeah. Oh, yes, absolutely. And I never like to compare law enforcement to military, because they're literally going to war. And I don't like to say that we as police are going to war. I don't like that terminology. We are, however, always dealing with negative calls for service. Nobody's ever calling the police to say, hey, great job, or hey, come over to my house and we're going to do this. It's always something's going wrong and they need assistance at a different level. The comparison is, like you said, a lot of times because of the profession that we have, whether it's the military or law enforcement, is we get trained that we are the people who are there to help other people. So we have to be stronger than those people and be able to deal with these things, and then put it aside and move on to the next call or situation, and not recognizing what that looks like or how that feels later on when you have to go home to your families or your children, and you don't want to share that information with them, because who wants to hear you know, that I just responded to a 4-year-old who got run over by a car and killed by a neighbor. And then have to process that, but at the same time move on to the next call because the calls are pending and people are expecting service. So I think as I went on in my career, I also became a peer support person. That was my give back for the person who helped me when the door opened itself for me to go into peer support, which if people don't know what peer support is within a law enforcement agency, it truly is fellow officers or even the professional staff members who get training in the area of, you know, dealing with effects of doing the job and stress and whatnot. And so we're available to anyone within the department. They know who we are. And if you have an issue, you can come to us, and depending on what it is, of course, obviously we don't, if you come to us with certain information, we may have to report it, but for the most part, it's just a go-to to help you work through that process so that when you go out and do your job, what's going on with you emotionally and personally is, and potentially professionally, is not affecting how you're treating people out in the field or on the phone if you're a dispatcher or at the records clerk desk or anything like that.
I just wanted you to know, I did call the watch commander and compliment these 2 officers that came out and had to remove this guy in my group who was getting very violent. And they did such a good job. But when I called the watch commander, he kept me on the phone for a long time because he wanted every detail. And I thought, we don't call you guys enough to thank you. I think in general that we need to be calling people, not just for help or to complain, but to thank them for what they're doing.
Yes, I encourage that, especially in this profession with the high stress level. If an officer getting a thank you is such a big deal, even if it's a handshake and a thank you, it is such a big deal for people in our profession because we're always, like I said, met with so much negativity. We used to have a woman in the city of San Bernardino, and she would go around every time she saw an officer, she already had pre-made thank you cards, just little cards, like a business size card. And I think she would have like a little candy or something in there. And it was just a thank you. Thank you for what you do. And that I would like to let people know goes a long way in the way that those officers will then go out and continue to positively contact the public and put aside the negativity and keep it positive.
Yeah, because I wonder, and I think about that. You did a period of time on Vice. Were you undercover in Vice, or were you? Yeah.
Yes. So in an undercover aspect, I was undercover in 2 capacities, either buying narcotics on the street, which is very dangerous, by the way. There's a lot that went into that. I made my team, even though I wasn't in charge of the team, I was an officer. But there were things that I would say, no, I'm not going to do that, because from a safety standpoint, I know what they want. Sometimes numbers never outweigh safety of the officers. And then I would also work undercover on the prostitution side. And oftentimes we would get out there and try and give assistance to the women who were actually working as prostitutes prior to us going out there, because they were only in business because of their customers. So we really wanted to address the other side, which is people coming into our cities when they live in other places and causing this dynamic that just tears down what our city looks like. It puts these individuals that are actually working on the streets into a dangerous position from a safety standpoint, from what's happening to them, the trauma that they've probably dealt with in their lives that caused them to be out there to begin with. Just such a big dynamic. But yes, working undercover was one of the things I knew that I wanted to do when I first became a police officer. And once I started doing it, I kind of thought, what am I doing? I put myself into even more danger by working undercover. But I made sure that, and my team always made sure that we were doing things as safe as possible. But there's so many different things to do in the profession once you get in. Initially, when I wanted to do this job, I just thought I was going to be working patrol in uniform, doing what we call pushing a black and white, which is driving a black and white patrol car and working patrol. And as I got into my profession and understanding that there were different details that you could attempt to be a part of, because it takes work to be a part of those specialized assignments and details. There's so many different details that you can be a part of, that you can work towards a goal of having. And then that's what I started doing. And I never thought about promoting past the level of doing special assignments. When I was a detective, or when I promoted to detective, I wanted to work homicide my entire career. And ended up taking the sergeant's test by chance and passing it. And so what I thought was going to be my path changed along the way because of people who came into my path, I'll say, and guided me in a different direction, or gave me information that guided me into a different direction. So I was very open to that along the way. And that's how I ended up where I was and ended up retiring out of the profession as a chief.
So, and by the way, I'm asking Shauna all these questions, but please jump in. So I'm not just dominating this. Feel free to jump in with your, because I've got a lot of questions for Shauna, but I want to make sure you get yours answered. So for you, what was the most challenging part of law enforcement, and what was the most rewarding part?
I would say challenging is adapting to the reality of the profession. You know, we go through a certain training process when you get hired, and you have to go through all the interview process and physical agilities, and you have to go through the police academy. I literally had never run before the police academy. And by run, I mean run like for miles, because they're getting you into shape. And so that was my first time ever running. And then going through a field training officer program after the academy, which what that entails is putting you with different senior officers who are training officers and learning the city, learning and how to apply what you learned in the academy in the field, learning the field. I think my reality also was, you know, I knew that I could, you know, get hurt or whatnot in the field, but I never thought about, hey, my partners could also get hurt in the field. So my reality was, no, not everybody likes the police, which is fine. And I think my reality came in the first time I ever got into a fight and got punched in the face, which I had never been in a physical fight in my life until I became a police officer, and I was arresting a man for possession of a stolen vehicle. And he turned around and punched me in the face, and I'm fighting with this guy, and you have that reality check of, okay, this is reality of what we have to deal with. So then trying to maintain that as you're continuing throughout your profession, that one, not everybody likes who you are, and simply by driving that car and putting on that uniform, you have to learn how to deal with that every day and understand that it's okay, that you still have a job to do. And there are guidelines within your profession that you have to follow. So follow those guidelines, not a problem. I would say my most rewarding time as a law enforcement professional was anytime I was working with kids. So along the way, you know, I'm not talking to just the community policing where you're out there and you're doing certain things. I've had the opportunity to be part of our PAL program with the city of San Bernardino. So as part of that, one of the officers, I was a sergeant at the time, one of the officers had asked me if I could be part of it. And that was taking at-risk youth girls on a 3 to 4 day camping trip locally, working in conjunction with the school district and getting them out of their environment and putting them into a camping situation where they've never been. They're intense. They don't have phones, they're hiking, they don't want to do anything. And that's all the first 3 hours of day one. And then building that rapport with them and being real with them, not just being a uniform, but showing them who you are as a human being. And by the end of the last day, tears flowing and people calling you mom and thank you for helping me, and still keeping that contact through the school district if those kids have issues, and watching them graduate high school, because these are high school age girls. And then we were also doing the boys. So there were male officers that were camping with at-risk youth that were boys. So that to me was the most rewarding. I had the opportunity to be on a school board for a charter school while I was still working, and having that connection. It was a public safety academy. So their foundation was first responders or military. So most of the kids that graduated, they were looking at careers in law enforcement, firefighting, medical field, the military. And so being a part of that and being on that school board and helping shape this very small charter school, and helping shape those kids for the future, to me, those are the most rewarding parts of the profession for me.
Oh, thanks, Shauna. Now we have some questions popping up, so I have to drop mine.
Okay.
Okay. Have you been involved in the hiring process, and what types of things should someone highlight when they're applying to be a law enforcement? And are advanced degrees important? That's one question, but if you forget the other parts while you're answering, I'll go back to it.
So the hiring process, I wish people would do a lot more research before they apply for a position in law enforcement. First of all, research the agency that you want to join. Sometimes people apply at multiple agencies, and that could come off as, well, do you just want a job, or do you want to work for us specifically because you want to stay here for the next 20 to 30 years for your profession or for your career? Because it's not a job, it is a career. And so to start off with, in its simplest way, when you complete an application for a job for a law enforcement agency, fill it out in its entirety. Fill it out clearly, double check it, triple check it, have someone else check it to make sure it's accurate. And after your application, if it's accepted, they usually will move you on to an interview, a panel interview. It usually consists of 3 people within the profession. I tell people this, it's just like being in higher ed. Do your research on the city that you're applying for. Know what you're saying. It's just not about, yes, I want to work here. I say you grew up in the city. It's not about just naming the chief or the sheriff, because that's the top executive of the organization. Dig into what the organization actually looks like. How many employees, how many sworn employees, how many professional staff, which is also called civilian staff. What are the demographics of the city? What do you bring to that city given the demographics? And just have deep responses and not just one word answers when you're doing an interview. You typically interviews have about 5 to 6 questions, and they're typically 20 to 30 minutes long, and that's all you have. So if you know how many questions you have, sometimes agencies will give you the questions 10 to 15 minutes before you step into the interview room, so you're not as nervous and you know what you're being asked. You can start to formulate some answers. But before you even get to that point at your home or wherever, at school, start writing down answers to questions that you think that you might be asked. They're going to typically ask you, why do you want to work for that agency? And that may also include, why do you want to be a police officer? And you'd be amazed. I've sat on, I couldn't tell you a number of panels, both for sworn and non-sworn positions. And I can't tell you, for me, the frustrating part is when somebody has like a 1-sentence answer and their interview is done in 5 minutes when they've been given 20 to 30 minutes. That shows that there was no preparation. So have all of your information down, understand what you're going to say, what you're going to talk about, as well as being prepared to have specific detailed answers. You will also, most agencies, because not every agency is the same, but you will have to fill out a personal history statement, which is several pages long, before you even go into your interview. So you're going to have a lot of details, a lot of reference information, people who they can call, lots of addresses, phone numbers, email addresses. So get that information ahead of time so that you have it available. And anything that you say or write on paper, be honest and truthful from the get-go. If it appears that you have written something down on a personal history statement and said something different in your interview, you will most likely automatically be disqualified. As far as the education side, there's people think differently. For me, I've always been into furthering my education. It comes from my mother, not both my parents. So my dad was they were both workers, but my mom was always, honest about getting an education. So for me, my thought is, yes, obviously I think furthering your education does add to what you can do within the profession. And at the same time, I know several people who have not furthered their education past high school or a couple of years of college and do just as exceptional within the profession. Recognizing that as you move on and want to promote within the profession, education is likely a requirement for most agencies. They want that. And they want to see that diversity and what you're getting your education in. So do you have to stick to law enforcement classes? Not necessarily, not at the beginning level, but be able to explain, what your choice is for your degree and why you chose that when you're now looking at a career in law enforcement. So hopefully I answered that fairly quickly.
You did. So, okay, we've got a couple more questions here. What are 2 traits that students should work on to be able to succeed in law enforcement?
Ooh, that's good. I would say patience. And I say patience because you will go into the profession believing that everyone is on your side. And when I say everyone, I mean community and maybe even internally at your organization, because you're all within the same profession. But things change. You're dealing with people at sometimes their worst moments in their life, and maybe their only contact ever with a police officer. So you have to have some patience. And I say that because you're still going through your life, personal life, when you're at work. So I've obviously had the experience of helping officers along who, they may be going through a divorce, but they still have to come to work and then go to a domestic violence call where the couple is going through a divorce, and that may trigger something for that officer. I even had an officer, I was actually doing a tour of a children's hospital, and we were doing the tour of a children's hospital so that we could do a fundraiser for the hospital. And we walk in and one of our officers is there, and we had no idea that his child was battling a disease, and yet he was still coming to work and no one even knew about it. He was just doing his job. So patience along the way, and that's not just the beginning, but throughout your career, is having a lot of patience. Another trait, honesty. For me, that's a big deal, whether people disagree with you or not. As long as you're honest in your dealings with people, as long as you treat people fairly, then that will take you a long way as well and will allow you to be successful. It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be easy, but that being a truthful, honest person is going to help you along the way. It's going to build your character within your organization and outside of your organization when the community sees that.
Shauna, I'm listening to you, and I think that one of the qualities that you must have a lot of is empathy.
Yes. So, you're absolutely right. And I say that because there's a time where you get stuck in, especially as you move through the ranks, because you're held to a certain standard especially when you get into the management level, supervisor level into the management level, and then the executive level, is that there are so many things coming in your direction. You're having to deal with staffing levels, you're having to deal with calls for service, all these different things, and ensuring that the community is still satisfied with what you're producing. And some people tend to forget that they're still dealing with human beings. So how do you best allow your people to be productive if you don't have empathy for some of the things that they're going through? Yeah, they may still need to work, but there may be some things that you can work around to ensure that they know that you're supporting them within their job. You still have an expectation that they need to do their job, but also giving them the guidance to deal with whatever issues they might be going through outside of their job.
Thank you. And this is a good question too. They're all good questions. There are many outreach programs bringing awareness to careers in law enforcement. How or what can be done to encourage more women and underrepresented communities to pursue those careers?
Great question. I don't know. So and that's one of the reasons that when I was asked to do this chat, that was part of it for me. Was when I go to a training class, when I was still in the profession, I was usually the only woman in the class, and definitely the only Black woman in the class. And now that I'm teaching through the Center for Criminal Justice at Cal State Long Beach, and I'm an instructor for classes, one of the first things I do is I look at my list and I see how many women are in the class, and not to take away from the men. I mean, this is who I am. So trying to promote that and mentor women and women of color into this profession specifically, because that's who I am. It can be difficult. I don't know if there's a fear behind it, but at the same time, when I came into the profession, I was in a male dominated field. It's still a male dominated field, and that's fine. I like to tell women, focus on what you're trying to achieve. If you want to be a law enforcement officer and that is your desire, go in, do the job. Don't necessarily get distracted about the things that are going on around you. You can still have a family. You can still, there's nothing that you can't do within this profession if you put your mind to it. It's just a matter of when you start off, what are you going to do? No one ever told me at the beginning of my career or throughout my career that I could be chief of police. No one. I was a sergeant, and one of our code enforcement officers, who was a lovely woman, I love her to death, she would walk by because she ended up working for me. We had combined our code enforcement department with the police department. And after a few months of her knowing me, because I had never known her, she started calling me chief. And I would say, stop calling me that, I'm a sergeant. And so she put in my head that I could potentially be a chief someday. So how do we bring more women into the profession? The best way, I say, is the women who are in the profession, or who have retired out of the profession, need to mentor others to get into the profession.
Yeah, that's, and speaking of chief, how did you do that and become chief? And what were those kinds of jobs that you had to do as chief that you didn't? Because it seems like chief is more political, but I don't know.
Oh, absolutely. So I left the city of San Bernardino as a lieutenant. I was offered a chief of police position with a college, with the Riverside Community College District. And I had already thought to myself, when I initially retire from the city of San Bernardino, that's where I want to go into. I knew in my head, for whatever reason, that I wanted to be at the community college district. And just so happened that I went to an emergency management type training class. It was a cohort in Riverside, met a couple of people who worked for that district. Throughout our time together, they said, hey, our chief spot's opening up, you should apply for it. And I was like, no, I'm a lieutenant. I've got a couple of years till I retire. I'm good. And things kept, just the way that life works, things keep getting put in your path, and it opens your eyes. You're like, well, maybe I will apply for it. Maybe I won't wait till I retire, or could retire officially at my retirement age, but could move on and go do it. And so I chose to apply for it, and I did get the job, obviously. And that process was pretty big process. When you're applying for a chief of police position at a college or university, I went through 2 different interviews, but the first panel was 12 people because the district has 3 different colleges. So they wanted to be all inclusive and have somebody from each campus on those interviews, which I thought was great. And then I thought to myself, how do I answer 12 questions in an hour? As you know, I don't have a problem talking, as you can see. So just focusing, and we go back to like that interview process at any level, is focusing on what the question is, giving the proper answer, giving examples of what could apply to that particular question, real life example, and then moving on to the next question. So, but yes, in that position, I liked working for the district, that particular district, because it was challenging because you have 3 different colleges in 3 different cities in one county. And the number of people that you are having to communicate with across the board, from faculty to staff to your bosses to the students, to me, I saw that as a challenge, and I'm always up for a challenge. So yes, there's a lot of different dynamics involved at that level. And you can't be everywhere at once. I mean, you can sort of now with Zoom, but before Zoom, you can't be everywhere at once. So you have to prioritize what's going on through your email or through when people are calling you, and just stay focused. I made sure from a mental health perspective, and I recommend it even when I teach the managers, is at some point you have got to turn off your cell phone. Not even necessarily your cell phone, but your email. And you get that beep on your cell phone because you've got an email coming in. I would turn off my email notification at 9 o'clock every night, because my husband doesn't want to hear it. And then it takes away from the family time. And then at some point you have to let it go and pick up again the next day. And that's what's different about this profession. As you move up, especially into the management level, there's this expectation that you're available 24/7, and that's almost impossible.
I just got a notice we have time for one more question for you. Well, maybe any final thoughts or recommendations, but also what for you as an instructor, what are some of the most important things that you try to impart to your students? And probably you've covered some of that, but
yeah, for me as an instructor, my hope is that the information that I provide to the people in front of me, that they understand it, that I've presented it in such a way that it is easy to go back and utilize it or teach it, because there are some classes that I do that are train the trainer. They go back and teach it the way that they learned it, and that they're able to understand it and interpret it. And final thoughts I would say is I always tell people at the end of every class that I teach that I've wanted to be a police officer since I was 14 years old. There's no other profession I've ever had a desire to do. And even with the lots of downs, but a lot of ups, I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world. It's a great profession. There are great people in the profession. There are some people in it that we need to get out of it. And I won't get into that, but we recognize that there are people who have no business wearing a badge. And there are many more of us out of the 800,000 law enforcement officers in this country that know that, and that are working behind the scenes to make sure that our profession is doing right by everybody, not just some people. So great profession, wouldn't have chosen any other life.
you know, I was going to say, in answer to the question of how you encourage more women, and I think you would be a great person to do that, because listening to you makes me want to be a police officer. And I'm 75, and I know I couldn't pass the running part, but no, because you still have passion for it, you have enthusiasm, and you present it in a way that I think for people they would resonate with. I think you should be the PR person.
And that's and honestly, the fact that I'm an instructor through the Center for Criminal Justice at Cal State Long Beach, when I spoke to the director who hired me, the director of the center, we were on the same page about what we really felt about being trainers. It absolutely has nothing to do with a paycheck. I could be in full retirement right now and I choose not to, because I feel like there's still more work to be done. Even at this age, I'll be 52 this year, and continuing to make improvements within the profession through training.
Jenna, are we over time? I don't.
Well, we're just about there. I definitely hate to interrupt such a great chat. I mean, honestly, it's been very informative, and you guys I can't thank you enough, Shauna, for your time and your story. And Alice, thank you so much for moderating today. But yes, eventually these chats do have to end. And with that ending, we just want to remind everyone that this is being recorded, so we will go ahead and put that up on our website, and it will live in our video library. And if you want to go ahead and get in touch with CSULB alumni, see how you can get involved, maybe do one of these chats, maybe moderate one of these chats, please send us a message. And here's our contact information. If you have questions for our host today, Shauna Gates, Shauna, how could people get in touch with you to ask any questions that they may still have?
Yeah, I am on LinkedIn. So if you want to log into LinkedIn, you will find me under Shauna Gates.
Awesome. Well, thank you both again so much. And it's been a pleasure today. And if you two could hang back while we say goodbye to everybody and have everyone filter out. Thanks so much, everybody. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.